Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick Moore. I'm the director of the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I am here with my colleague, José Carlos Diaz, who is the chief curator at the Andy Warhol Museum. And we are so sorry that we can't be with you in Beijing. We would love to be at UCCA celebrating with you the opening of Becoming Andy Warhol. But in our absence, we're hoping that we can say a few words about the exhibition and to thank you for your support. We particularly want to thank Phil Tenari and also the team at UCCA. Everybody has just been fantastic, and we've had a great experience organizing this special exhibition with you. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Andy Warhol Museum before Jose and I get started on our conversation. The Andy Warhol Museum started in 1994, and it is one of the 4 Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh. The Warhol was started in collaboration between the Andy Warhol Foundation in New York City, the Dia Arts Center, and the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh. We hold the largest collection of Warhol's work and archives in the world, including his film and video work. And the museum has a full-fledged education program, performing arts program, and we also present exhibitions all around the world. So when you're traveling in the United States, we hope that we will see you in Pittsburgh at the Warhol, and either Jose or I will be really happy to give you a tour of the exhibition. So Jose and I wanted to talk a little bit about the exhibition that you're hopefully going to see today. And I wanted to ask you, Jose, a question, which is, what is different about this exhibition at UCCA? There are many other large Warhol exhibitions that we've mounted and others have mounted around the world. What's different about Becoming Andy Warhol?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and hello, everyone in China. And I too want to thank the team at the UCCA, and I hope the exhibition is of great interest and is a huge success. And Becoming Andy Warhol, it's sort of been a labor of love for the both of us and the team here at the Warhol. It is quite different, Patrick. This particular show, there's over 300 objects, but it's broken down into 5 chapters. And so that's kind of interesting when you think of an artist who had a career that spanned over 4 decades. And so the exhibition, although it's not chronological, it does cover aspects of Warhol's life, but also his career from his youth, his early youth here in Pittsburgh. The museum, the Andy Warhol Museum, is located here in Pittsburgh, but Andy Warhol himself is from Pittsburgh. And the chapters are broken down into his origins and his childhood and his college work and his early years in the 1950s New York. And then we move on into other aspects of focus on photography, which hasn't really been explored in a very dense way. And this is looking at Warhol not only as someone who was using, Polaroid cameras to make and produce his portrait commissions, or Warhol using appropriated images, photos made by other people, but also Warhol as one who documents his world. And certainly Warhol was a creature of the night and one who sort of documented and also recorded the life around him. And the exhibition also has a strong emphasis as Warhol as a filmmaker. This is something that's sort of underappreciated. And this particular exhibition has over 24 remastered films, many of them screen tests. These would have been the superstars and sort of the creative individuals coming into Warhol's world. But again, remastered, the quality has never been seen like this before. So it's really incredible. And then along that, Warhol is someone who sort of revisits subjects and topics. So we do this through canvases, but also works like the source material. We have a lot of the source material here in Pittsburgh that has never traveled, so we have a lot of things that have never been seen. And finally, we have Warhol. We have a section prior to Warhol's death, a lot of the late work. And I think the show, what's a little bit different about this show is that it does have some very popular works. You will see, for example, Campbell soup cans, but you're also going to see other iterations of that. But also Warhol in other ways such as experimental photographer. We have his stitched films, or his stitched photos. But then we also have Warhol playing and sort of exploring abstraction. So it really is a really fun exhibition, but a lot of new information and also a new perspective on Warhol. And I know, Patrick, we live and breathe Andy Warhol, and we've worked together for many years. But I was just curious, what areas of Warhol's work intrigues you?
Mm. Well, pretty much everything about Warhol intrigues me, but two areas that you just mentioned that are represented in Becoming Andy Warhol, I think are really fascinating. The first being films. Warhol's films, when I came to Pittsburgh and to the Warhol, I was amazed that arguably the most famous Western contemporary artist had an entire body of work that was pretty much unknown, or certainly largely unknown. So the films, both as films and as sort of objects in the way that they're displayed at the UCCA, are particularly interesting to me. And the more and more of the films, as you and I know, are being discovered all the time, and we're in the process of digitally transferring them. And then another area that you had mentioned, which is the late work from Warhol. That late work where you, Jose, for example, have done so much research about Warhol's Catholicism and his spiritual life, and how that kind of influence washed back over those late works. It happens so often with so many artists. The first kind of big explosion of creativity is what's celebrated, but then later in the artist's life, they come back to really fascinating themes. And so I think that those late works will be a surprise to people when they see the exhibition. A question back to you, Jose. You know, you work so much with young, emerging, exciting artists. It's a big part of the program that you have here at the Warhol. What is it about Warhol that remains so interesting and exciting to young artists?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Well, I think it's incredible as this show is actually going to the UCCA because their program too focuses on contemporary artists, as does our program. So not only do we produce and organize Andy Warhol exhibitions, we also work on exhibitions with, we say, living artists. And you know, the one thing about Andy Warhol is that he's multidisciplinary. And I think a lot of young contemporary artists, they're not just painters or sculptors or photographers. They can do it all. And I think that's something that Warhol really embraced and perhaps was even criticized for. But I think that's the beauty of Warhol. There was no limitations, whether it was technology based, and certainly that's something we talk about today in the art world, but also other areas of creativity, whether it's fashion or painting or writing. And Warhol certainly dabbled in everything from Interview magazine to even working with fashion houses. But also Warhol is someone who constantly reinvented himself. Physically, you look at him and you'll see, certainly in Becoming Andy Warhol, you'll see one of the earliest self-portraits he ever made when he was here in Pittsburgh. And he's just this creature of transformation. So as you see the different sections in the show, you'll see how he evolved. But that also meant that he evolved the circle around him, whether it was his superstars in the 1960s in the Silver Factory. These were all also young, creative, and chaotic people. But he was so curious, and you see that again in the 80s, the 70s, and the 80s. And so I think for this particular exhibition, and especially in China, we're introducing Andy Warhol to a whole new generation. And this is a generation of artists, not just artists who see Warhol here in Pittsburgh or New York City, but now we're having a new generation of young artists in China and Asia, seeing one of the largest exhibitions taking place of Warhol's work. And I think they'll be really baffled, surprised, charmed by Warhol's MTV, early like music video television shows. I mentioned the stitched photography, a lot of Warhol's sort of preliminary works that lead to some of the masterpieces that we know today. So no, I think it's going to be a really incredible opportunity for young people to see the show. And, I think people will fall in love with him.
I think you're right. And it is so exciting to think of young artists seeing Warhol for the first time.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, you know the collection so well. Is there any particular works that are actually in this show that you wanted to maybe mention or talk about?
Yeah, it's, it could be endless, but I think I'll point out two canvases, actually three canvases. People associate Warhol with some of these iconic advertising images and brands from the 1960s. So in the exhibition is our really extraordinary Coca-Cola painting from 1961. And in it, we see Warhol still painting by hand. He hasn't yet really embraced the silkscreen, as he will later on. And also, as you and I talk about when we're giving tours of the museum, there's a messiness to the canvas. Warhol still feels to be a serious painter. he needs to be able to show us his hand. He needs to, give a nod back to abstract expressionism when artists were throwing paint around and there was a lot of vitality. But then there are two other canvases in the remix section of New Coke from 1985. So Warhol comes back to this iconic American brand of Coca-Cola, and we see it as he may have seen it in the 1960s, also from his childhood. And then we see New Coke from the 1980s. New Coke is entirely flat. Many people, when New Coke was introduced in America, they said, oh, it's so bland. It doesn't taste like Coca-Cola. And I think actually Warhol captures some of that. But still, there's a kind of vibrancy to the colors. But we go from something that is very sort of charming, but of its period in the 1960s, to Warhol reflecting his culture in the 1980s. And so perfectly doing that visually. Let me throw back the same question to you. What would be an object that you would point out to visitors in Beijing?
Yeah, I would actually say the non-fine art objects. There's a few objects in the show that have never been exhibited even in our own museum. Some of those things, we have three actually Polaroid big shot cameras. These were invented in 1971. They're clunky, they're plastic, they cost about $20 when they came out. Warhol loved them, and these were the chunky cameras that Warhol used to do a lot of those celebrity portrait commissions, and this would lead on to his process, which became these plastic acetate sheets, which would become the screens, which would be screened, become the portraits. And so those objects are there, but we also have an early projector from the 50s that would have made something like these hand-painted soup can paintings and Coke bottles that you referenced. And we also have an Oricon camera from 1964. This is a camera on a tripod that Warhol actually used to do some of his feature-length films, such as Lonesome Cowboy. It's never been exhibited outside of our museum, and we showed it in a very small section of our 1960s gallery. But yeah, I love the things that are sort of part of the. Additionally, in our origin section, we have some exhibition copies because they don't exist, but of the earliest storefront windows. Warhol actually was working in storefronts in department stores doing window dressing here in Pittsburgh. The summer of 1947, he was working here at a place called Horn's Department Store. And we actually have we have about 10 photos in the exhibition, never before exhibited, of some of these storefronts that Andy possibly would have worked on and are from the sort of same time period. But also we've created exhibition copies of replicas based on photographs of storefronts that actually Warhol made. And they include consumer goods. This is pre-pop. This is sort of builds up to what Warhol would make. And we know in 1961 at Bonwit Teller department store, Warhol actually exhibited some of the very first pop paintings within the windows of the department store in New York City. And so for fans of Warhol and visitors of Warhol and young artists to see that, all these objects and relics that are sort of part of the evolution of Warhol, I think, or the becoming of Andy Warhol, I think people are really going to gravitate towards those objects. And as I said, we haven't really showed them, so I'm really looking forward to see how people will react to those.
Yeah. Well, I wish that we could be there to see them ourselves installed. Jose, I want to thank you because I've really enjoyed co-organizing this project with you. And Jose and I have great hopes of being able to join you in Shanghai this fall. We're very sorry that travel restrictions don't allow us to be there right now, but please know how grateful we are, how excited we are to share Warhol's work with the people of China. And again, our very sincere thanks to Phil Tenari and the entire UCCA team. You are an extraordinary partner for us, and we hope that we'll do many other projects with you. Have a wonderful time today, and thank you for seeing the exhibition, and we will hope to see you in November in Shanghai. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.